A commercial airliner carrying 239 people vanished during a routine overnight flight from Malaysia to China. For hours, nobody knew where it was. Then, a satellite detected one final signal from the aircraft. After that, silence. No distress call, no emergency beacon, no confirmed contact ever again. The plane was Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, and more than a decade later, investigators still cannot explain what happened after that last signal. MH370 left Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, shortly after midnight on March 8, 2014. It was heading to Beijing, China. For about 40 minutes after takeoff, nothing appeared unusual. The weather was calm, the aircraft was cruising normally. Air traffic controllers expected it to continue on its planned route. Then, around 1:20 in the morning, local time in Malaysia, the cockpit transmitted a routine sign-off. "Good night, Malaysia 370. Those were the last recorded words from the flight. Within minutes, MH370 disappeared from the radar used by normal air traffic control. That alone would have been alarming. But military radar later showed something even stranger. The Boeing 777 passenger jet had turned back across Malaysia and headed west over the Straits of Malacca between Malaysia and Indonesia before vanishing completely. The aircraft did not simply disappear, it changed direction. Investigators later confirmed that the aircraft stopped sending its normal tracking data early in the flight, and the transponder signal was lost shortly afterward. Exactly why those systems stopped remains unknown. No emergency was reported, no mayday call was heard. For several days, the world believed the aircraft had simply vanished from the sky. Then, engineers examining satellite records discovered a hidden trail. Even after radar contact was lost, the aircraft continued exchanging brief automated signals with a British satellite company called Inmarsat. These were not voice messages. They were not text messages. They were tiny digital signals used to maintain a satellite connection. But those signals changed the entire investigation. Inmarsat found 7 hourly satellite contacts after the aircraft disappeared from radar. Each contact provided 2 clues: an approximate distance from the satellite and a change in frequency that hinted at the aircraft's movement. By combining those clues with the performance limits of a Boeing 777, analysts reconstructed a possible route. The result was chilling. MH370 appeared to have continued flying for roughly 6 more hours after disappearing from radar. Think about that. For 6 hours, a passenger jet carrying 239 people may have been flying through the darkness while the world had no idea where it was. The mystery was no longer, where did MH370 disappear? It became a far more disturbing question. Where did it fly for the next 6 hours? Imagine boarding a plane in Kuala Lumpur, expecting to wake up in Beijing. Instead, the aircraft turns away from its route, flies into the darkness, and vanishes from the world's air traffic system. That is what makes MH370 different from almost every other aviation disaster. Once investigators realized the aircraft had continued flying for hours, they had to answer a new question. Where could a Boeing 777 have gone in that time? The satellite data produced 2 enormous curved search areas. One stretched north across parts of Asia. The other stretched far south into the Indian Ocean. At first, both possibilities were considered. But as investigators studied radar data, fuel estimates, and satellite measurements, the southern route began to look more likely. That conclusion changed everything. The search moved into one of the most remote regions on Earth, the southern Indian Ocean, thousands of kilometers from the nearest major city. Search aircraft scanned huge areas of ocean. Ships crossed rough seas. Underwater vehicles mapped the seabed. It became one of the largest and most expensive searches in aviation history. And still, Nothing definitive was found. Weeks passed, then months. No main wreckage, no flight recorders, no clear answer. For the families of the passengers, the silence became its own kind of nightmare. Then, in July 2015, a breakthrough finally came. A large aircraft part washed ashore on Réunion Island, a French island in the western Indian Ocean. Investigators identified it as a Flaperon, a movable section of a Boeing 777 wing. It was the first confirmed piece of MH370. Additional debris was later found along the coasts of Mozambique, Tanzania, South Africa, and nearby islands. These discoveries strongly suggested that the aircraft had ended its journey somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean. But they still did not reveal why. Investigators considered several possibilities: a sudden mechanical failure, a fire or smoke emergency, loss of cabin pressurization, which could have left everyone unconscious while the aircraft continued on autopilot, and deliberate human action. None of these explanations has been proven. The official investigation did not determine a final cause. That is an important distinction. One detail continued to trouble investigators. The aircraft's apparent turn back across Malaysia looked more controlled than a random emergency maneuver. But controlled does not automatically mean deliberate. Without the flight recorders, investigators could not know who was in control of the aircraft during its final hours. By January 2017, the official underwater search had covered more than 120,000 square kilometers of seabed without locating the main wreckage. The search was suspended. Think about that for a moment. An aircraft carrying 239 people had disappeared, and after years of searching, investigators still could not find the crash site. Most aviation accidents eventually produce a wreckage field, flight recorders, and a reconstruction of the final minutes. MH370 produced fragments, partial data, and a vast, empty ocean. And that is why the mystery refused to disappear. By the time the official search was suspended, investigators had spent years studying satellite data, radar traces, ocean currents, fuel calculations, and debris drift patterns. Yet the central question remained unanswered. What happened during the final hours of MH370? Today, many aviation experts believe the aircraft most likely flew south into the Indian Ocean until it ran out of fuel. After fuel exhaustion, the engines would have stopped, electrical power would have begun to fail, and the aircraft would have descended into the ocean. That scenario fits much of the available evidence, but it is still not a proven conclusion. The flight data recorder has never been recovered. The cockpit voice recorder has never been recovered. Without those devices, investigators cannot know the crew's final actions, the condition of the aircraft, or the exact sequence of events. That is why MH370 remains an unsolved mystery rather than a solved accident. Over the years, many dramatic theories have appeared online: secret landings, hijack plots, hidden military operations. The official investigation found no evidence supporting those claims. That does not mean every question has been answered. It means the evidence available today is not enough to confirm those stories. The mystery survives because of missing evidence, not because of proven conspiracy. One detail is often overlooked. The last confirmed human communication from the aircraft was not a scream, a warning, or a mayday call. It was an ordinary sign-off. Goodnight, Malaysia 370. For the passengers, the flight may still have felt routine at that moment. For air traffic controllers, it sounded routine. And that may be the most unsettling part of the entire story. The transition from normality to disappearance happened almost without warning. MH370 also changed aviation. Airlines and regulators began pushing for better aircraft tracking over remote oceans, improved communication systems, and faster methods for locating missing aircraft. In a tragic way, the disappearance exposed weaknesses in global aviation tracking that many people had assumed did not exist. But technology alone cannot close this case. Somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, the main wreckage may still lie undiscovered beneath deep water. Until it is found, every explanation remains incomplete. A passenger jet left Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, on a routine overnight flight to Beijing, China. About 40 minutes later, it sent a routine sign-off. It turned away from its route. It continued flying for hours. A satellite detected one final signal. Then it disappeared. More than a decade later, investigators have satellite data, radar traces, recovered debris, and thousands of pages of analysis. What they still do not have is the answer. And that is why MH370 remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in modern aviation.